Captain Marcus Chun had seen many strange things during his 15 years of deep space cargo runs, but nothing quite like the creature bleeding out on his ship's medical bay floor. The thing was roughly the size of a large dog, covered in iridescent scales that shifted from deep purple to silver in the artificial light. Its 6 legs were folded beneath a serpentine body, and delicate wing membranes stretched between elongated digits on what Marcus assumed were arms. The distress beacon had come from the debris field of what looked like a civilian transport. Marcus wasn't supposed to investigate. His company had strict policies about staying on schedule, but the signal was weak and fading fast. Something about it tugged at his conscience in a way that cargo manifests and delivery deadlines never could. When he'd suited up and crossed to the wreckage, he'd found the creature trapped beneath a collapsed bulkhead, its breathing shallow and labored. One wing was clearly broken, and a deep gash ran along its side, leaking what he assumed was blood, though it was a startling shade of blue-green. Now, 2 hours later, Marcus knelt beside the creature in his ship's small medical bay, applying what first aid he could manage. His training was basic at best, designed for human injuries, but he'd managed to stop the bleeding and immobilize the broken wing. The creature's large, multifaceted eyes followed his movements with what seemed like intelligence, though it hadn't made a sound since he'd brought it aboard. "Easy there, little one," Marcus murmured, checking the improvised bandages. "I know this probably hurts like hell, but I'm trying to help." The creature's eyes shifted to meet his, and Marcus felt a strange sensation, like someone gently brushing against his thoughts. Images flashed through his mind. Not his own memories, but something foreign and urgent. He saw towering spires of crystalline architecture, beings similar to the injured creature moving with purpose through vast halls, and an overwhelming sense of desperate need. Marcus jerked back, his heart racing. What the hell was that? The creature's eyes dimmed slightly, and the sensation faded. But the urgency remained, settling in Marcus's chest like a weight. Whatever this thing was, wherever it had come from, it needed more help than he could provide with his basic medical supplies. Marcus pulled up his navigation charts, studying the nearby systems. There was a trade station about 6 hours away, but it catered mainly to human and Terran Alliance species. He doubted they'd have the expertise to treat something this exotic. Beyond that, the next closest civilized system was controlled by the Zephyrian Collective, a species known for their advanced biotechnology, but also their extreme xenophobia. They barely tolerated human traders, and bringing an unknown alien to their space might result in his ship being destroyed on sight. But as Marcus looked down at the creature, watching its labored breathing, he realized he didn't have much choice. The thing was dying, and the Zephyrians were the only ones within range who might be able to save it. He returned to the bridge and plotted a course for Zephyr Prime, the Collective's main trading hub. It would take 18 hours at maximum burn, assuming his aging cargo hauler's engines didn't give out. He sent a standard docking request, identifying himself as an independent cargo vessel requesting emergency medical assistance for an injured being. The response came back within minutes. Request denied. No alien biologics permitted in Zephyrian space without proper authorization and quarantine protocols. Deviation from designated shipping lanes will result in immediate interdiction. Marcus stared at the message, his jaw tightening. The Zephyrians were efficient, he'd give them that, but their policies were brutal when it came to anything outside their narrow definition of acceptable trade partners. He considered his options. He could try the trade station after all, though it would likely be a death sentence for the creature. He could attempt to find another system, though that would add days to the journey. Or he could do something spectacularly stupid and run the Zephyrian blockade, hoping to get close enough to their planet to make his case in person. A soft sound from the medical bay made the decision for him. The creature was calling out, not in any language he could understand, but with a series of musical tones that conveyed pain and fear more clearly than words ever could. Marcus set course for Zephyr Prime and pushed his engines to maximum burn. If the Zephyrians wanted to stop him, they'd have to catch him first. And if this little act of defiance ended his career or his life, at least he'd go down trying to do the right thing. The creature's condition worsened over the next 12 hours. Despite Marcus's best efforts, the bleeding had resumed, and its breathing became increasingly erratic. He'd moved it to his own quarters, where he could monitor it more closely, and had rigged up what he hoped was a more comfortable resting area using spare blankets and cargo padding. Twice more he'd experienced those strange mental flashes, images of the crystalline city, but also something else, a sense of vast intelligence, of beings whose thoughts moved in patterns far more complex than human consciousness. And underneath it all, a growing certainty that this creature was more than it appeared to be. Marcus was checking the navigation display when the proximity alarms began blaring. 3 Zephyrian patrol craft had appeared on his sensors, their sleek forms moving to intercept his trajectory. They were fast, much faster than his cargo hauler, and their weapons systems were already powering up. "Unknown vessel, you are in violation of Zephyrian territorial space," came the transmission. "Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded, or you will be destroyed." Marcus opened a channel. "This is Captain Marcus Chun of the independent vessel Wandering Star. I'm carrying an injured being that needs immediate medical attention. I'm requesting permission to land and seek help. Request denied. You were warned about the consequences of entering our space without authorization." The lead patrol craft fired a warning shot across his bow, close enough that his hull shook from the energy discharge. Marcus gritted his teeth and continued his course toward the planet. The creature in his quarters was running out of time, and he wasn't about to give up now. What happened next defied everything Marcus thought he knew about Zephyrian protocols. Instead of destroying his ship, the patrol craft suddenly broke off their attack pattern and formed an escort formation around him. New coordinates appeared on his navigation display, directing him to a landing pad in the planet's capital city. "Follow the designated flight path," came a new transmission, this one from a different voice, older, carrying an authority that made Marcus's spine straighten instinctively. "Any deviation will result in immediate termination." Marcus followed the coordinates, his mind racing. Something had changed, but he couldn't figure out what. As his ship descended through the planet's atmosphere, he caught his first glimpse of Zephyrian civilization. Massive cities that seemed to grow organically from the landscape, their bioarchitectural style creating flowing curves and spirals that looked more like art than engineering. The landing pad he was directed to was different from the industrial cargo areas he'd expected. This was clearly a government facility, surrounded by elegant spires and gardens that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. As the ship touched down, Marcus could see dozens of Zephyrians moving with purpose across the landing area, their tall, graceful forms coordinating with an efficiency that spoke of long practice. But what caught his attention was the figure standing at the center of the group, a Zephyrian unlike any he'd seen before. Where most of the species appeared roughly humanoid with elongated limbs and feathered crests, this individual was larger, more imposing, with bioluminescent patterns running along their skin that pulsed in complex rhythms. Even from the distance of his cockpit, Marcus could feel an aura of command that made his earlier certainty about defying Zephyrian authority seem suddenly naive. As the ship's engines wound down, Marcus made his way back to check on his patient one final time. The creature's eyes opened as he approached, and once again he felt that gentle brush against his thoughts. But this time, instead of urgency and pain, he sensed something that might have been gratitude, and underneath that, a complex emotion he couldn't quite identify. The airlock hissed open, and Marcus stepped out to face whatever consequences awaited him. He'd broken half a dozen interstellar laws getting here, but as he looked down at the dying creature in his arms, he knew he'd do it all again without hesitation. What he didn't know was that the being he'd rescued wasn't just any member of its species, and the Zephyrian standing at the center of the welcoming committee wasn't just any government official. In the next few minutes, Marcus Chun was about to discover that sometimes doing the right thing has consequences far beyond anything you could imagine. Consequences that would reshape not just his own life, but the delicate balance of power between entire civilizations. The Zephyrian who approached Marcus's ship moved with a fluid grace that spoke of both authority and barely contained urgency. Up close, Marcus could see that the bioluminescent patterns on their skin weren't just decorative. They pulsed in complex sequences that seemed to convey information to the other Zephyrians nearby. The being was tall, even by Zephyrian standards, with 4 arms that ended in delicate, multi-jointed fingers, and a crown of crystalline structures that grew from their skull like organic jewelry. "I am Premier Veltar of the Zephyrian Collective," the being said, their voice carrying harmonics that made Marcus feel as though the words were resonating inside his bones. You carry something precious, human. Marcus shifted the injured creature in his arms, acutely aware of how small and fragile it felt against his chest. I found it in a debris field. It was trapped and dying. I couldn't leave it there. Veltar's large, compound eyes studied the creature, and Marcus noticed the other Zephyrians around them had gone completely still. The silence stretched for several seconds before the Premier spoke again, their voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire landing pad. Do you know what you carry, Marcus Chun of Terra? I know it's hurt and needs help, Marcus replied, uncertain why everyone was acting as though he'd brought something far more significant than an injured animal. Veltar extended one of their four arms, and Marcus felt a strange compulsion to hand over the creature. As their fingers made contact with the small being's scales, the Premier's entire body seemed to glow brighter, the patterns on her skin shifting to new configurations that Marcus had never seen before. This is Silandra, Veltar said softly, Crown Princess of the Ethereal Dominion, heir to the throne of one of the most powerful civilizations in this galaxy. And you, Marcus Chun, have just saved the life of someone whose death would have meant war between a dozen star systems. Marcus felt his knees go weak. Princess? But she looks like a hatchling. Yes, Veltar confirmed, gently taking the creature, Silandra, from Marcus's arms. The ethereal are a long-lived species. Their young remain in this form for what you would consider decades before their first transformation. But even as hatchlings, they possess intelligence that rivals our greatest philosophers and psychic abilities that can reshape matter at the molecular level. The Premier turned toward a group of waiting Zephyrians, who immediately formed a protective formation around them. Take her to the biosynthesis chambers immediately. Full royal protocols. And send word to the Ethereal Embassy. Tell them their princess lives, and that we have the human who saved her. As the group moved toward the nearest building, Marcus found himself swept along by a tide of official activity. Zephyrian guards flanked him, though whether they were protecting him or keeping him prisoner, he couldn't tell. The building they entered was unlike anything he'd ever seen. The walls seemed to be alive, pulsing with the same bioluminescent patterns that decorated the Zephyrians themselves. Premier, Marcus called out as they walked through corridors that adjusted their configuration around them. What happens now? I'm just a cargo hauler. I was trying to do the right thing, but I don't know anything about interstellar politics, or... Veltar slowed their pace, allowing Marcus to catch up. Marcus Chun, you have stumbled into something far more complex than you realize. The Ethereal Dominion has been searching for Princess Silandra for 6 standard months. She disappeared during a routine diplomatic mission to the Outer Rim, and every attempt to locate her has failed. Her parents, the King and Queen of the Ethereal, have grown increasingly desperate. They passed through what appeared to be a medical facility, though the equipment looked more like art installations than surgical tools. Crystalline formations grew from the walls and ceiling, connected by flowing tubes that carried luminescent fluids. Zephyrian medical technicians moved with practiced efficiency, their 4 arms allowing them to operate multiple instruments simultaneously. The Ethereal are not known for their patience when their young are threatened, Veltar continued. 3 weeks ago, they issued an ultimatum to all known civilizations. Produce their daughter within 1 solar cycle, or face the consequences. That deadline expires in 4 days. Marcus watched through a transparent wall as the medical team worked on Silandra. The hatchling was surrounded by devices that seemed to scan every molecule of her body, while healing compounds were introduced through her skin via some process that looked almost like photosynthesis. But why would they threaten everyone? Marcus asked. Surely they don't think every civilization is responsible for one missing princess. The Ethereal don't think like humans, or even like us, Veltar explained. They're a collective consciousness species. What affects one affects all. When Silandra disappeared, it created a psychic wound that reverberates through their entire population. Every day, she remains missing. Every moment she suffers is experienced by millions of her people simultaneously. The Premier's skin patterns shifted to darker hues as they continued. More concerning is the fact that Salandra's disappearance coincided with several other incidents. Cargo ships vanishing, communication arrays going offline in specific sectors, and reports of unknown vessels operating in areas that should be uninhabited. Someone has been very carefully orchestrating something, and the princess was either a target or simply got caught in the crossfire. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. You think someone kidnapped her? I think someone has been preparing for war, Veltar said grimly. And Princess Salandra was supposed to be one of the casualties that would justify it. They were interrupted by a commotion from the medical bay. One of the technicians was gesturing urgently at their instruments while speaking rapidly in a musical Zephyrian language. Veltar's skin patterns shifted to configurations Marcus was learning to associate with alarm. What is it? Marcus asked. The princess is rejecting our healing compounds, Veltar explained. Her physiology is more damaged than we initially assessed. The trauma she experienced has created a psychic feedback loop that's interfering with her body's natural healing processes. Through the transparent wall, Marcus could see Salandra writhing on the medical table, her scales shifting through rapid color changes that seemed to indicate distress. The musical sound she'd made on his ship had returned, but now they were discordant and filled with what could only be described as anguish. Can't you do something? Marcus pressed. You said you have the most advanced medical technology in this sector. We do for Zephyrian physiology, Veltar replied. But ethereal biology operates on principles we don't fully understand. Their physical forms are as much psychic construct as biological reality. To heal her body, we need to heal her mind, and to do that, the premier trailed off, their compound eyes studying Marcus with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. What? Marcus demanded. She's formed a psychic bond with you, Veltar said slowly. Those mental flashes you experienced on your ship, that wasn't accidental telepathic contact. She was trying to establish a connection with the being who saved her life. It's an instinctive response among young ethereal when they're traumatized. Marcus looked through the wall at the struggling hatchling, remembering the images she'd shared with him. The crystal cities, the sense of vast intelligence, and underneath it all, a desperate need for safety and understanding. What does that mean? It means you may be the only one who can help stabilize her psychic state long enough for our medical procedures to work, Veltar explained. But it also means exposing yourself to the full force of an ethereal mind, even a young one. Humans aren't designed for that kind of psychic contact. The experience could be overwhelming, even dangerous. Marcus watched Salandra's distress, seeing in her movements the same fear and pain he'd witnessed when he'd first found her in the wreckage. The decision wasn't really a choice at all. What I need to do? Veltar's skin patterns shifted to what Marcus was beginning to recognize as approval. You'll need to establish physical contact while we work. Her psychic abilities are trying to reach out for the familiar presence that represented safety during her trauma. If you can provide that anchor, our medical team should be able to complete the healing process. As they prepared to enter the medical bay, Marcus realized that his simple act of mercy had set in motion events that would ripple across the galaxy. He'd saved the life of an alien princess, but in doing so, he'd also stepped into a larger conflict, one that someone had been carefully engineering, and that would ultimately test whether different species could work together or tear each other apart. The next few hours would determine not just whether Salandra survived, but whether the fragile peace between civilizations would hold together long enough for the truth about her disappearance to emerge. The moment Marcus placed his hand on Salandra's scaled forehead, the world exploded into sensation. It wasn't like the gentle mental brushes he'd experienced on his ship. This was a torrential flood of alien consciousness that threatened to wash away everything he understood about reality. He found himself standing in the crystal city from his earlier visions, but now he could feel it as well as see it. Every surface hummed with living energy, and the towers that stretched toward an impossibly purple sky were not built, but grown, shaped by collective will into forms that defied physics. Ethereal beings moved through the air around him, their mature forms bearing only passing resemblance to the hatchling he was trying to help. They were creatures of living light and thought, their bodies shifting between solid matter and pure energy as their emotions demanded. But underneath the beauty of this place was a wound, a psychic scar that ran through every structure, every consciousness. The absence of Silandra had created a hole in the collective experience that was slowly poisoning everything it touched. She is precious beyond your understanding. A voice spoke directly into his mind. Marcus turned to find himself facing two ethereal, whose forms blazed with an intensity that made it difficult to look directly at them. Even in this psychic realm, he could feel the weight of their authority, their desperate love, and their barely contained rage. The king and queen, Marcus realized, though the concepts of monarchy and family seemed inadequate for beings who existed as facets of a greater whole. Our daughter reaches out to you across the void of space and time. The queen's voice carried harmonics that spoke of eons of accumulated wisdom and recent devastating grief. You are the light in her darkness, the anchor that keeps her spirit from dissolving into the pain of her injuries. The king's presence pressed closer, and Marcus felt his consciousness examined with an intensity that was both invasive and somehow gentle. You are not what we expected, human. Your mind is simple, direct. You act from instinct rather than calculation. This quality may be why she trusts you, and why you may be able to succeed where others have failed. I don't understand, Marcus managed to think. I'm just trying to help her heal. The physical healing is only part of the challenge, the queen explained. Our daughter's memories of her capture and imprisonment have been sealed away by trauma. Until those memories are processed and integrated, her psychic state will remain unstable. She needs someone to guide her through those experiences, someone she trusts completely. The crystal city around them began to shift, the towers rearranging themselves into new configurations. Marcus realized he was seeing Silandra's memories reshaping themselves, preparing to reveal what had happened during the months she'd been missing. The ones who took her were careful, the king said, and Marcus could hear the promise of terrible retribution in his voice. They used psychic dampening fields to prevent her from calling out to us, and they kept her in a state of partial sensory deprivation. But they made one mistake. They underestimated her ability to retain memories even under extreme duress. The scene around Marcus changed, and suddenly he was in a different place entirely. The organic beauty of the ethereal city was replaced by stark metal corridors and harsh artificial lighting. He could feel Silandra's confusion and fear as though they were his own emotions, and the knowledge that this was a memory of actual events made it all the more horrifying. The beings who had captured her were humanoid, but clearly not human. Their skin had a gray, almost metallic sheen, and their eyes were too large and too dark. They moved with mechanical precision, and when they spoke to each other, their voices carried none of the warmth or emotion that Marcus associated with conscious beings. The nullifiers, the queen's voice whispered through the memory. A species that rejected psychic evolution in favor of technological enhancement. They view consciousness itself as a weakness to be eliminated. Marcus watched in horror as the nullifiers subjected the young princess to experiment after experiment, trying to understand how her psychic abilities worked so they could develop countermeasures. They kept her in a cage that constantly shifted its configuration, preventing her from developing any sense of familiarity or safety. The psychological torture was as methodical as it was cruel. But worse than the experiments was the slow realization that this wasn't random cruelty. It was preparation for something larger. The nullifiers were building weapons specifically designed to disrupt ethereal consciousness, and Silandra had been their test subject. They're planning to attack your people, Marcus realized. Yes, the king confirmed. And they intended for our daughter's death to be the trigger that would justify our retaliation against other species, including yours. The nullifiers have been orchestrating conflicts throughout this sector, playing different civilizations against each other while they prepare their final assault. The memory shifted again, showing Silandra's escape. It hadn't been rescue. It had been chance. A malfunction in the facility's power systems had caused a cascading failure that damaged her containment unit. In the chaos that followed, she'd managed to reach a small escape pod, though her injuries and the lingering effects of the psychic dampening had left her barely able to pilot it to safety. The pod had been failing when Marcus found her, its life support systems damaged beyond repair. She would have died within hours if he hadn't intervened. As the memory faded, Marcus found himself back in the Crystal City, but now he understood the true scope of what he'd stumbled into. This wasn't just about saving one being's life. It was about preventing a war that could consume entire star systems. "What do we do now?" he asked. "Now we heal," the Queen said. "And then we prepare. The nullifiers will not expect their test subject to have survived, much less to have found allies. This gives us an advantage we have not had before." The king's presence grew more intense. "But first, you must help our daughter fully integrate these memories. She has seen the full scope of their plans, but the trauma has fractured her ability to access that information consciously. You must guide her through the healing process." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "I don't know how. I'm not trained for this kind of thing." "You don't need training," the Queen said gently. "You need compassion, courage, and the willingness to share in her pain. These are qualities that cannot be taught. They must be chosen." The psychic realm began to fade around them, and Marcus felt himself being pulled back toward physical reality. But before the connection ended completely, the king spoke one final time. "Marcus Chan of Terra, you have done more than save our daughter's life. You have given us hope that different species can work together when faced with a common threat. But be warned, the nullifiers know that someone interfered with their plans. They will come looking for both you and Silandra. Your act of mercy has made you a target in a war you never knew existed." Marcus's consciousness snapped back to the medical bay like a rubber band, leaving him gasping and disoriented. The Zephyr medical team was working frantically around Silandra's still form, their instruments showing readings that he couldn't interpret, but that clearly indicated distress. "She's fighting the memories," Premier Veltar said urgently. "Her conscious mind is trying to reject the information her subconscious is revealing. If we can't stabilize her soon." Marcus didn't wait to hear the rest. He pressed his hand more firmly against Silandra's forehead and reached out with his mind, trying to recreate the gentle connection they'd shared on his ship. This time, instead of being pulled into her memories, he found himself in a space that felt neutral, a mental meeting ground where they could interact without the overwhelming intensity of full psychic contact. Silandra appeared before him in her hatchling form, but her scales were dull and her eyes filled with a pain that seemed too large for her small frame. "It hurts to remember," she said in his mind, her voice carrying the musical qualities of her species but tinged with exhaustion. "I know," Marcus replied, "but you're not remembering alone anymore. I'm here, and I'm going to help you through this." Together, they began the slow process of examining each memory, allowing Silandra to experience them fully without being overwhelmed. Marcus found that his human perspective helped. Where her ethereal consciousness tried to process everything simultaneously, his more linear approach allowed them to take things one step at a time. As they worked through the traumatic experiences, Silandra began to stabilize. The information about the nullifier's plans became clearer, and with it came a terrible understanding of just how close the galaxy had come to a devastating war. But they also discovered something the nullifiers hadn't counted on. Silandra had managed to memorize the location of their main facility, along with details about their weapons and their timeline for attack. The healing process took hours, but finally, Silandra opened her eyes in the physical world, her scales showing the healthy iridescent shimmer that Marcus remembered from their first meeting. The Zephyr medical team stepped back with obvious relief as their instruments confirmed what everyone in the room could feel. The princess was going to survive. But as Marcus looked into her large, multifaceted eyes, he knew that survival was only the beginning. The nullifiers were still out there, their weapons were still being built, and somewhere in the depths of space, they were preparing for a war that would reshape the galaxy. The question now was whether the various species of the sector could work together fast enough to stop them, and whether one human cargo hauler and a young ethereal princess could make the difference between peace and annihilation. The war council that assembled in the Zephyrian capital 3 days later was unlike anything Marcus had ever imagined. Representatives from dozens of species filled a circular chamber that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its crystalline walls reflecting not just images, but thoughts and intentions from all present. Marcus sat beside Premier Veltar, still struggling to accept that he'd somehow become Earth's unofficial representative in a conflict that could determine the fate of the galaxy. His cargo hauler credentials hardly seemed adequate preparation for interstellar diplomacy, but as Cylandra had pointed out during one of their psychic conversations, sometimes an outsider's perspective was exactly what was needed. The princess herself rested in a specialized chamber adjacent to the main hall, her recovery progressing faster now that her memories had been integrated. But she remained connected to the proceedings through her psychic abilities, providing crucial intelligence about the nullifier threat while the various species debated their response. At the center of the chamber stood a holographic display showing the sector map, with red indicators marking known nullifier positions and yellow zones representing areas where their influence was suspected but not confirmed. The scale of the threat was staggering. The nullifiers have been operating in secret for decades, slowly building their forces while positioning assets throughout civilized space. The evidence is clear, declared Ambassador Thrixon of the Crystalline Collective, their voice resonating through harmonics that made the chamber walls shimmer. The nullifiers have been orchestrating conflicts between our peoples while preparing for a coordinated assault. The question now is whether we can set aside our differences long enough to mount an effective defense. Some of us have been saying this for years, growled Commander Rexer of the Ursine Confederacy, his massive frame making the specialized chair groan under his weight. But every time we tried to warn other species about unusual activities in the outer systems, we were told we were being paranoid. Marcus listened to the debate with growing frustration. Each species had encountered evidence of nullifier activity, but the fragments had been carefully designed to look like natural phenomena or the actions of other civilizations. Only now, with Cylandra's memories providing the missing context, could they see the full scope of the manipulation. The princess's intelligence indicates they plan to begin their assault within 10 standard days, Premier Veltar announced, causing a ripple of alarm through the assembled representatives. Their primary target is the ethereal homeworld, but their strategy depends on preventing any organized response from allied species. Ow, asked Dr. Yenna of the Pacifist Coalition, her tentacles writhing with anxiety. Cylandra's voice echoed through the chamber via the psychic amplifiers the Zephyrians had installed. They have weapons designed specifically to disrupt our collective consciousness. If they succeed in their attack on our world, the psychic shock will be felt by every ethereal throughout the galaxy. Our people will either die or be driven insane, eliminating us as a threat. But that's genocide, Dr. Yenna protested. Exactly, Commander Rexer said grimly. And while we're dealing with the humanitarian crisis, they'll move against the rest of us one by one. Classic divide and conquer tactics. Marcus had been studying the tactical displays while the others debated, and something had been nagging at him. Finally, he stood up, feeling every eye in the chamber turn toward him. "Excuse me," he said, his voice sounding small in the vast space. "I'm not a military strategist, but I've spent a lot of time moving cargo through this sector, and something about their positioning doesn't make sense." Ambassador Thrixon's crystalline form shifted to face him more directly. "Please explain." Marcus gestured toward the holographic display. "Look at where they've placed their major assets. They're all positioned along primary shipping routes, but they're avoiding the most efficient paths between systems. If I were planning a military campaign, I'd want control of the fastest routes to ensure rapid troop movement." "Perhaps they're trying to remain hidden," suggested Dr. Yenna. "No, that's not it," Marcus said, his confidence growing as he worked through the logistics. "They're positioning themselves to control refugee flows. Look, if they attack the ethereal homeworld here, survivors will flee along these routes. The nullifiers are positioned to intercept them." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Premier Veltar's skin patterns shifted to configurations Marcus had learned to associate with deep concern. "They're not just planning to attack the ethereal," Veltar said slowly. "They're planning to ensure no survivors escape, to warn other species, or coordinate a resistance. But that suggests they have intelligence about our defense strategies," Commander Rexer growled. "Someone has been feeding them information about our capabilities and response protocols." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus could feel the tension in the chamber ratchet up several notches as representatives began eyeing each other with suspicion. "This is exactly what they want," Cylandra's voice cut through the growing hostility. "They want us to turn against each other instead of focusing on the real threat." The human has identified a crucial flaw in their strategy. We need to exploit it, not waste time searching for traitors who may not even exist. Marcus cleared his throat. Actually, I think I might know how they're getting their intelligence, and it doesn't require a traitor. He manipulated the holographic display, highlighting a series of seemingly innocuous cargo stations scattered throughout the sector. These are automated trading posts, places where ships can refuel and resupply without direct contact with inhabited worlds. I've used most of them myself over the years. They're convenient because they're neutral territory operated by AI systems that don't care about your species or political affiliations. I failed to see the relevance, Ambassador Thrixon said. The relevance is that every ship that uses these stations has to transmit cargo manifests, flight plans, and basic technical specifications for docking purposes, Marcus explained. That information is supposed to be purged after each transaction, but if someone had modified the AI systems to retain and transmit copies, they'd have real-time intelligence on ship movements, cargo types, and defensive capabilities across the entire sector. Premier Veltar finished. Brilliant in its simplicity, Commander Rexer's expression shifted from suspicion to grudging respect. The cargo hauler has a point. We've been looking for sophisticated intelligence networks when the answer was hidden in plain sight. More than that, Marcus continued, if they control the automated stations, they can influence where ships go by adjusting fuel prices and supply availability. They've been herding us into the positions they want for years. Dr. Yenna's tentacles had stopped writhing as she processed this information. Can we verify this theory? I can, Cylinder said. During my captivity, I overheard references to something called the Commerce Protocol. At the time, I thought they were discussing trade agreements, but in light of this new information, it makes perfect sense, Premier Veltar concluded. The question now is whether we can turn their own intelligence network against them. Marcus had been thinking about that exact problem. We can do better than that. If they're using the automated stations to control ship movements, we can use the same network to coordinate our response without alerting their main forces. Explain, Commander Rexer demanded. We stage a fake evacuation, Marcus said, warming to the idea. Make it look like the various species are panicking and fleeing in different directions. But instead of actual refugees, we send military assets disguised as civilian ships. When they move to intercept what they think are defenseless evacuation convoys, we spring the trap, Ambassador Thrixon said, their form brightening with what Marcus was learning to recognize as excitement. But the timing has to be perfect, Premier Veltar warned. And we'll need someone who understands the cargo network well enough to coordinate the deception. Every eye in the chamber turned toward Marcus, and he felt the weight of expectation settling on his shoulders like a physical force. A week ago, his biggest concern had been meeting delivery deadlines. Now he was being asked to help coordinate a multi-species military operation that could determine the fate of galactic civilization. I'll need access to the shipping databases and communication logs, he said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. And I'll need teams who can modify the automated stations without triggering security protocols. Done, said Commander Rexer. My engineers are specialists in that kind of work. I can provide psychic coordination to ensure all teams remain synchronized, Cylinder added. My recovery is nearly complete, and this kind of tactical link is within my capabilities. As the representatives began working out the details of their deception, Marcus found himself thinking about the strange chain of events that had led to this moment. If he hadn't investigated that distress beacon, if he hadn't risked everything to get Cylinder to safety, the galaxy would be facing the nullifier assault with no warning and no coordination between species. Sometimes, he realized, the most important choices were the ones that seemed smallest at the time. The decision to help a dying creature had set in motion events that might just save billions of lives. But the hardest part was still ahead. They had a plan, but executing it would require perfect timing, flawless coordination, and more than a little luck. And somewhere in the depths of space, the nullifiers were putting the finishing touches on weapons designed to exterminate entire species. The next few days would determine whether the galaxy's diverse civilizations could work together to face a common threat, or whether they would fall one by one to an enemy that had been preparing for this moment for decades. The operation began exactly 72 hours after the War Council adjourned. Marcus found himself aboard the Zephyrian Command vessel Luminous Dawn, watching dozens of holographic displays that showed the coordinated movements of what appeared to be a massive refugee exodus. Ships from every major civilization were streaming away from their homeworlds in patterns that looked like panic, but were actually carefully choreographed. On the surface, it appeared that news of the impending nullifier attack had leaked, causing mass evacuations across multiple star systems. Ethereal vessels fled their crystal cities, Zephyrian bioships departed their garden worlds, and human cargo haulers like Marcus's own ship joined the apparent exodus. To outside observers, it looked like the galaxy's civilizations were abandoning their colonies in terror. In reality, most of the refugee ships were military vessels in disguise, carrying enough firepower to sterilize planets. The real civilian populations were safely hidden in heavily defended bunkers and mobile habitats, protected by defensive networks that had been secretly reinforced over the past 3 days. Phase 1 is proceeding as planned, reported Commander Rexer from his position at the tactical console. Nullifier forces are moving to intercept our evacuation convoys exactly as predicted. Marcus studied the displays showing nullifier ship movements. Just as he'd theorized, they were using the automated trading stations to coordinate their response, sending hunter-killer groups to specific intercept points along the major shipping routes. They believed they were about to eliminate fleeing civilians while preventing any coordinated military response. Salandra, how are the psychic links holding up? Premier Veltor asked. The princess's voice resonated through the command center from her position in the dedicated communication chamber. Despite her youth, she had proven capable of maintaining mental contact with commanders across dozens of light years, providing real-time coordination that no technological system could match. All task forces are reporting ready status, she confirmed. The nullifiers haven't detected our communication method. They're still relying entirely on intercepted transmissions from the automated stations. Marcus felt a surge of pride at how well their deception was working. The enemy was responding exactly as they'd hoped, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The nullifiers had been planning this campaign for decades. Surely they would have contingencies for unexpected resistance. His concerns were validated when new contacts appeared on the long-range sensors. Unknown vessels approaching from the galactic rim, announced the Zephyrian sensor operator. Configuration matches nothing in our databases. Massive energy signatures. The tactical display updated to show 3 enormous ships emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the system. They were unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Geometric shapes that seemed to hurt the eyes to look at directly, their surfaces absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Those aren't nullifier designs, Commander Rexer growled. What are we looking at? Salandra's psychic presence suddenly blazed with alarm. I recognize those ships from my captivity. The nullifiers have allies, species that chose technological enhancement over biological evolution. They call themselves the Convergence. The 3 massive vessels began moving toward the inner system with frightening speed, and Marcus realized their carefully planned operation was about to become significantly more complicated. How does this change our strategy? Premier Veltor asked. Marcus studied the new tactical situation, his mind racing through possibilities. The convergent ships were heading directly for the ethereal homeworld, ignoring the fake evacuation convoys entirely. They knew about the deception. They're not falling for it, he said grimly. Someone warned them, or they have better intelligence than we thought. Actually, Salandra's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. This might be even better than our original plan. How do you figure that? Commander Rexer demanded. Because now they've revealed the full scope of their alliance. Look at the formation. Those 3 convergent ships are the core of their entire assault force. If we can disable them, we cripple their ability to coordinate the attack. Marcus was already working out the implications. But to get close enough to engage ships that size, we need to abandon the deception and commit everything we have. It's an enormous risk. The risk is worth it, Premier Veltor said decisively. Send a signal to all task forces. Operation parameters have changed. We're going for a decisive engagement. What followed was the largest coordinated military action in recorded galactic history. Ships that had been pretending to flee suddenly, reversed course, and converged on the convergence vessels. The fake refugee convoys revealed themselves as battle groups, their disguised weapons powering up as they accelerated toward the enemy. But the convergence ships were ready for them. As the Allied forces approached, the massive vessels began deploying swarms of smaller craft, technological horrors that seemed to blend organic and mechanical elements in ways that defied understanding. The space around the ethereal homeworld became a chaotic battlefield as hundreds of ships engaged in close combat. Marcus watched the battle unfold from the command center, coordinating logistics and supply runs while the military commanders handled tactical operations. His cargo hauler experience proved invaluable in managing the complex supply chains needed to keep the battle groups fighting effectively. But it was Silandra who made the crucial difference. Her psychic abilities allowed her to coordinate Allied movements with a precision that no purely technological system could achieve. She guided damaged ships to safety, directed reinforcements to critical points, and maintained communication links even when conventional systems were being jammed by convergence technology. The turning point came when she detected a pattern in the enemy's movements that had been hidden from purely tactical analysis. "The three large ships aren't just command vessels," she announced urgently. "They're components of a larger weapon system. They're trying to position themselves in a triangular formation around the ethereal homeworld." Marcus felt his blood run cold as he understood the implications. If they complete that formation, they can project their consciousness disruption weapon across the entire planet. Premier Veltar finished. "We have to stop them from reaching their positions." The Allied forces threw everything they had at the convergence ships, but the massive vessels seemed almost invulnerable to conventional weapons. Their adaptive armor systems absorbed energy attacks and deflected kinetic projectiles with equal ease. It was Marcus who suggested the solution, drawing on his experience with cargo handling and industrial accidents. "We can't damage them from the outside," he said, "but what if we got something inside their defensive perimeter? Something they wouldn't see as a threat?" The plan that emerged was as desperate as it was ingenious. Using his knowledge of automated systems and Silandra's psychic abilities to mask their approach, they would pilot a single cargo hauler, Marcus's own ship, directly into the formation center. The ship would be loaded with a specially modified Zephyrian bioweapon designed to disrupt the technological systems that kept the convergence vessels functioning. It was essentially a suicide mission. The weapon would be just as deadly to the delivery crew as to the target, and the chances of surviving the approach were minimal. "I'll do it," Marcus said simply. "It's my ship, my plan, and I'm the only one here with experience flying through combat zones in a civilian vessel." "You won't be going alone," Silandra said. "I'll need to maintain psychic camouflage to get us through their defensive perimeter and coordinate the weapon's deployment." Premier Veltar's skin patterns shifted through configurations Marcus had learned to associate with profound respect. "This is beyond what any reasonable being should be asked to do." "Nothing about this situation is reasonable," Marcus replied. "But sometimes that's exactly why it works." The approach took 47 minutes, the longest 47 minutes of Marcus's life. His cargo hauler, now equipped with Zephyrian stealth systems and carrying a weapon that could eliminate entire star systems, threaded its way through the massive battle, while Silandra used her abilities to make them effectively invisible to convergence sensors. When they reached the center of the triangular formation, Marcus activated the bioweapon, while Silandra projected its effects through the psychic dimensions that connected all three vessels. The results were immediate and catastrophic. The convergence ships simply stopped functioning, their hybrid organic technological systems shutting down as the weapons severed the connections between their biological and mechanical components. Without their command vessels, the nullifier forces collapsed. Their automated ships, deprived of central coordination, began attacking each other as their programmed directives conflicted. Within hours, the threat that had been building for decades was eliminated. Marcus and Silandra barely survived the mission. The bioweapons effects were contained by emergency systems just in time, but both of them spent weeks in medical facilities recovering from psychic and biological trauma. When Marcus finally regained consciousness, he found himself in the same Zephyrian medical facility where he'd first brought Silandra for treatment. The symmetry wasn't lost on him. He'd saved her life, and in return, she'd helped him save the galaxy. The ethereal king and queen want to meet you, Premier Veltar informed him during one of his recovery sessions. They're planning to establish a new organization, a permanent alliance between species to prevent anything like the nullifier threat from emerging again. Marcus considered this news carefully, and they want a cargo hauler to be involved in interstellar politics. They want someone who understands that sometimes the most important decisions are made not by governments or militaries, but by ordinary individuals who choose to do the right thing, Veltar explained. You've proven that humans have a perspective that other species need to consider. Through the medical bay's transparent wall, Marcus could see his ship being prepared for departure. The Wandering Star had been extensively modified during the recent operations, equipped with technology that would allow him to serve as an unofficial ambassador between human space and the new alliance. Silandra, now fully recovered and beginning to show signs of her first transformation toward adult form, appeared beside his bed in a shimmer of psychic energy. "Ready for your next cargo run?" she asked, her mental voice carrying notes of affection and gratitude. Marcus smiled as he looked out at the stars. A week ago, he'd been a simple cargo hauler trying to make delivery schedules. Now he was apparently Earth's representative in a galactic alliance that would reshape the future of multiple civilizations. Sometimes, he reflected, the universe had a sense of humor about these things. But he learned that when the universe offered you a chance to make a difference, the only reasonable response was to say yes and figure out the details later. As the medical monitors showed his vitals returning to normal, Marcus began planning his next route through the stars. Not as a simple cargo hauler, but as someone who had learned that the most precious cargo wasn't goods or materials, but hope, trust, and the willingness to risk everything for a stranger in need.